Hey, what's up everyone? In this video, I've just got some GH5 B-roll tips that I use and some general rules that I follow when I go to shoot cinematic B-roll with my GH5. Oh, and I almost forgot, I'm gonna start with a bonus tip. Make sure you always have some great tunes pumping when you go to shoot B-roll.
It's finally nice to see you. It's been a long time coming, and now I get to meet you.
If you're new to this channel, my name is Caleb and I've been doing freelance video production since 2012. But this channel is to help you make your own videos, whether you just started or you've been making them for a while. Whether you use the GH5 or any other camera, if that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. So cinematic B-roll comes in a bunch of different sizes, shapes, frame rates, whatever you want to say. But these are just a few tips that I use and a few general rules that I follow when I go to shoot B-roll with my GH5. And all of these tips don't include any type of gimbal or tripod. Everything is handheld. Now I'd love to make this a full conversation, so if you have any B-roll tips, make sure you comment your B-roll tips down in the comment section and let's get the conversation started. Now one of the first tips I have is shooting your B-roll in either 60, 72, 96, or 120 frames per second. Now I know I say a lot, don't overuse those frame rates, but this is where the IBIS of the GH5 really shines. So the IBIS of the GH5 is really going to be able to control those micro jitters. When you're shooting in those variable frame rates like 60, 72, 96, 120, especially 120, and you'll really see those handheld shots really steady out. But again, don't overuse those variable frame rates when you're getting B-roll. Use some things like 24, or if you shooting 30 frames per second, use those as well. You might want to be on a tripod or on a gimbal if you're going to be using those 24 or 30 frames per second. But what I've noticed with the variable frame rates is that you can get some very smooth, steady shots handheld with the GH5. So the second cinematic B-roll tip that I have is use objects in the foreground. So I use this tip all the time, whether I'm on a client shoot or whether I'm making a YouTube video or just making a home movie, whatever it is, I always use objects in the foreground. So I don't know if you remember the old GoPros, but you would see those GoPros mounted to a helmet where you could see kind of the front of the helmet, maybe to somebody's chest, and you could see their hands on the handlebars. But the reason that something was in the foreground like that, like the edge of their helmet, was to make the image look more stable than it actually was. So when you had that part of the helmet in that image, you would notice the front of that helmet was stable, therefore making the whole image look way more stable than it actually was. Now the GoPros have the stabilization in them and they look awesome now. But before all that, you would mount a GoPro to a helmet and make sure something was in the foreground to make the image look stabilized. And that's kind of the same concept here, where you have something in the foreground which is going to make the image look more stable. So another reason to have objects in the foreground is it's going to show a little bit more movement. So if you're focused on something in the distance, especially shooting in variable frame rates like 120, the movement is so slow. So if you have something in the foreground, it shows just a little bit more movement in that image. All right, the third tip that I have, and this one I've been using a lot more lately. I didn't used to use it as much, but I've been using it a lot more lately in my videos, is that I have motion that flows always in the same direction. So usually my shots go from like left to right. Well, in the camera it'd be left to right. It's my left to right. Or I have a lot of push-in shots. Why am I not even holding my camera? Or I have a lot of push-in shots. So a lot of left to right and a lot of push-ins. A lot of times with those push-ins, you can reverse them if there's not people walking to give the pull-away effect. But I wanna make sure that my B-roll is all kind of flowing in the same direction. If you wanna go the other direction for a different scene, that's totally fine as well. But make sure your motion in your scene is always moving the same direction. This is like I'm doing exercises or something. I'm not big into yoga, but maybe like camera yoga. You know, just practice your motion. Left to right, push in, push in. Another tip that I have when shooting handheld, a cinematic B-roll with your GH5 is to limit the amount of steps that you take. So once you start taking steps and start walking with the camera, you're gonna start noticing those bounces like this, and it's gonna create some bouncing and some jitters in your footage that you probably don't want. Now, if you have a lot of walking shots in your video, you're probably gonna wanna use some type of gimbal, or really work on that, gimbal walk where you're trying not to move your arms and your knees are bending, but try to limit the amount of steps that you take to limit the bouncing and the jitters in your footage. And this leads me to my next tip, is have fluid arms. Not noodle arms. Don't be a noodle arm guy or girl, but have fluid arms. So fluid arms means you want to be loose, you want to be flexible, be able to move easily and fluid and get in that B-roll that you're shooting in that same direction that we talked about earlier. But you want to be loose, not noodly, fluid. Another rule I follow when I shoot my GH5 B-roll is that I try to get different angles. Now, if you're with a character, different angles can show whether that character is powerful or weak or sad. If you're shooting architecture, it can show how big something is or how small something is. So if you're shooting something like a hiking sequence, like I'm out in nature right now, maybe get some feet walking on a trail or somebody looking up to the trees, but change the angle, change the position. You don't want to shoot everything just from your chest. So don't be afraid to get down low or stand up on a rock and shoot downwards, whatever that might look like. Change up the angle of your B-roll. And that's gonna make for a way more dynamic video. Another tip that I have specifically for the GH5 is make sure you have your grid and your level line on your screen. That's gonna help so much when you go for like your leading lines, your rule of thirds, whatever that might look like. Having that grid on there is really gonna help. And then having that level line on there, you're gonna be able to level out horizon lines and wider shots, things that are out in the distance. You're gonna be able to line those up a little easier and a little better. And I love that the GH5 has those tools. And I love that the GH5 has those tools on the screen for you and for me, especially because I need it. All right, so go out and shoot, put these B-roll tips to practice. Also, if you do happen to make a video with some of these B-roll tips in them, make sure you comment that link below. I got a truck going by. Make sure you comment that link below. I wanna see that video. And let me know what tips you use in that video. If you have the time, I'd love for you to stick around and just watch one of these videos that's popping up on your screen right now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.